afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 15th of April. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. At sundown, the nation will mark the start of Holocaust Remembrance Day with memorials and services. Commemoration of the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis and their collaborators begins with a state torchlighting ceremony attended by President Reuven Rivlin and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem. The chief rabbis will recite psalms and the mourner's Kaddish prayer. The theme of this year's observance is the anguish of liberation and the return to life 70 years after the end of World War II. During the ceremony, 6 survivors light a torch in memory of the 6 million. Tomorrow morning, the country will come to a standstill for solemn reflection at 10 a.m. when a memorial siren rings out, followed by a wreath-laying ceremony at Yad Vashem's Warsaw Ghetto Square. Afterward, at the museum's Hall of Remembrance, there will be a ceremonial reading of the names of Holocaust victims. All of the official ceremonies will be broadcast live on this channel, as well as on Israel Television Channel 1. Turning to the Iranian nuclear deal, and U.S. President Barack Obama is backing down on his earlier threat to veto a proposed congressional bill to review any final accord. The decision follows the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's unanimous passage of a bipartisan bill, which is expected to become law in the coming weeks. IBA's Margot Dukavich reports.
U.S. President Barack Obama will not veto a Senate bill calling for oversight on an Iranian nuclear deal, after the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee unanimously voted for a compromise, paving the way for Congress to be involved in the final nuclear deal with Iran, and satisfying the White House's concerns that a harsher bill could derail the agreement due to be completed by June. Prior to the vote, President Obama threatened to veto any attempt by Congress to sabotage a deal with Iran after a preliminary agreement was reached in Lausanne, Switzerland last month. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry asked Congress for space and time to complete the deal.
We have 2.5 months more to negotiate. That's a serious amount of time with some serious business still to do. So we hope Congress will listen carefully and ask the questions that it wants, but also give us the space and the time to be able to complete a very difficult task which has high stakes for our country. It involves major national security, major issues of potential conflict versus peaceful resolution. And we're very hopeful that this dialogue will be very productive.
The Senate panel yesterday voted 19-0, approving the measure. According to the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, Congress will be able to review the deal drawn up between the Islamic Republic and P5+1 countries before the U.S. sanctions are lifted, allowing a 12-day period for a possible presidential veto and an additional 10-day window to allow the override of such a veto. The much-contested vote cut the political divide, with Democrats and Republicans emphasizing the need for such an agreement.
We've just received a classified and technical briefing from the administration, but there's nothing classified or technical about the fundamental flaw with the president's proposal. It puts Iran, the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism, on the path to a nuclear weapon. Whether that's a matter of months or a matter of years, that's a dangerous outcome not just for the United States and our allies like Israel, but the entire world. And the president has walked back on his own commitments.
More fully than ever, I believe Congress should play a role in ensuring that all the details that need to be in place are there, and that on behalf of the American people, before the congressionally mandated sanctions are lifted, that we on their behalf ensure that this is something that holds Iran accountable, is enforceable, and certainly is very transparent.
I think this is the right way for Congress to take up this issue. I think this is congressional prerogative, and that we are the ones who impose the sanctions. We're the ones who are going to have to take it up for permanent changes. So I would hope that the White House would recognize this is congressional prerogative, that we have, if anything, reinforce the president's ability to negotiate, and there will be no action taken by Congress on the substance of the agreements till we receive the agreements. Congress can always take action. This gives us an orderly path forward. I would hope the administration would support that.
Senators Corker and Cardin, who authorized the bill, said the move will further talks between Iran and the P5+1 countries, the United States, Britain, France, China, Russia and Germany, allowing them to continue unhindered by congressional intervention. But the Obama administration will only be able to lift sanctions on Tehran after Congress approves, and Congress will also have the ability to permanently change or modify the sanctions regime.
Congress stays involved if an agreement is reached. And if one is not disapproved, Congress stays involved.
Bottom line is, there is no disagreement in this committee or in the Congress that we cannot trust Iran, and that the agreement must be able to assure that Iran does not become a nuclear weapon state.
Yesterday's vote leaves President Obama with room to maneuver to broker a final deal with Iran, and leaves the Senate with a role in deciding when sanctions should be lifted. Moga Dudkevich, IBA News.
Top Israeli officials are welcoming the Senate bill, including Intelligence Minister Yuval Steinitz, who called the legislation an achievement for Israeli policy, and he credited Prime Minister Netanyahu's address to Congress in March for inspiring the bill. IBA's Eli Wogelenter to discuss this latest development with U.S. Israel Affairs expert Professor Gerald Steinberg.
I think the very fact that it's no longer simply the Obama administration or the President and the Secretary of State that are going to judge or negotiate, judge, and sign an agreement, but it now does have to go through the congressional process. And even though the terms of the legislation are very murky, and the sponsors, and certainly Israel, would have wanted to see more details on it, it means it's going to be a more complex political process. It's no longer veto-proof at all, and therefore there's going to be more room for Israeli input in that process. The U.S., the Obama administration has got to be more careful that the final terms, if they're actually reached at the end of June, are not going to be full of holes, more like Swiss cheese is going to have more holes than substance in it. And that's certainly what we have out of Lausanne. So by Congress becoming a player, Israel says, okay, now we've got a different playing field than we had before, different ways to influence.
In other news, hundreds of IDF troops launched a major overnight raid with the Shin Bet security agency in the Nablus area. 29 wanted Palestinians were arrested, including senior members of Hamas and former prisoners involved in terror activity on behalf of the group. Over 50 military vehicles were deployed during the mission, aimed at restricting recent attempts by Hamas to establish a terrorist infrastructure in the West Bank, funded by its command operatives in Gaza and in Turkey. Soldiers from the Duvdevan unit participated in the roundup, alongside those from the ultra-Orthodox Netza Yehuda, Nahal Reconnaissance, and Golani Brigade's 12th battalions. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Russian President Vladimir Putin have discussed Moscow's decision to sell S-300 missile systems to Iran. During a telephone conversation yesterday, Netanyahu warned that the move undermines Middle East peace, sending a bad message to Tehran that will likely embolden the Islamic regime to increase its aggressive behavior. He also stressed that the cancellation of Russia's voluntary 5-year ban on delivering the system gives Iran additional defense against potential military attacks. 5 S-300 batteries could be received by the end of the year at a cost of $800 million. According to the Kremlin, Putin told Netanyahu that the weaponry is purely defensive and won't pose a threat to the security of Israel or any other country in the region. Israeli officials, nevertheless, are not happy about that response.
We are very disturbed from the selling of S-300 missiles to Iran. We think that this is wrong. We think that it will convey the wrong message to the Iranians, that it's at the very time that they are sponsoring terrorism all over the Middle East, they can get such kind of weapons. I think that this is another negative impact or consequence of the Lausanne framework.
A recent survey shows that more than 80% of Israelis feel that the memory of the Holocaust is fading away, and that in just a few years from now, the Nazi genocide of Jews could become a vague historical event. That poll was conducted by the Geocartography Institute and the Center of Organizations of Holocaust Survivors in Israel, whose chairwoman and former Knesset member Colette Avital now joins me from our Tel Aviv studio. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If this poll reflects the unimaginable reality that the horrific events of the Shoah could soon become a footnote of history, what more can be done to maintain awareness?
I think many things can be done, many things have been done, and so far it's the first, second, and even the third generations that are very closely involved. And I do see a lot of activities, both in the educational system, in the trips to Poland, in the fact that so many Holocaust survivors do go and meet the youngsters in schools, in army camps, and so on. So a lot is being done today. The question is not what is being done today. The question is really how do we prepare the future so that this event does not come belittled or banal and is remembered in the right context by our people. And we're coming out of Passover. And look how many years, how many thousands of years we're reading the same Haggadah for an event that brought the Jewish people from servitude to freedom. And we all read the same text. So perhaps the idea, one of the ideas today that we're considering is the writing of a Haggadah of the Holocaust, where people could transfer the stories and the lessons and the understandings of the Shoah, what it meant for us, but also the fact that there are survivors, that we survived, that we rebuilt ourselves from the ashes, that we created the State of Israel. I think that it's a question of also how you interpret history. Some say that it's a long chain of misfortunes and oppression. I see it differently. I see it as a long history of attempts to annihilate us, but of redemption in the end. And here we are, and I think it is our duty today really to pass on the memory, but to pass on the memory not only of the people who died, but to pass also the memory of the people who fought as partisans and in the ghettos, and to pass the memory of a culture that existed for over 1,000 years, let's say, in Europe, and we should not let it disappear. So we have a huge task ahead of us.
Now, you are the head of the umbrella organization of 52 separate other groups, and you are recognized by the government as the representative for the entire survivor population in Israel. At least 45,000 of those survivors are estimated to live under the poverty line. What is being done to help them?
Look, I do not want to belittle that problem. On the contrary, this is exactly why we exist, and this is what we have been fighting for many years, to get the rights for Holocaust survivors, especially now when they're getting older. And you know that with old age, our needs change. People become more vulnerable, people become lonely, people around them die, and the memories coming back and the traumas too. So I think we need to take special care and not to let anyone in their old age, and certainly not the Holocaust survivors, not live their last years in dignity. So I'm not sure if this is the correct number. I do have to recognize, though, that in the year that has passed, the government, especially the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Lapid, passed a law which gave the Holocaust survivors, the needy Holocaust survivors, another 1 billion Israeli shekel. Now, you know, it's always not enough. It's actually never enough, because you need home care, and you need medicine, and you need to let people have enough to heat themselves in the winter, and so on and so forth. So I do hope that the next Knesset, which hopefully is going to start working very soon, you know, it's about time, will complete the legislation and try to cope with the issues. We don't have much time. Cope with the issues that relate to the welfare of Holocaust survivors, especially those that do not receive any pension from anywhere, and still there are groups that have been left out.
I'm afraid we're out of time today. We'll definitely have you back to explore other issues. Chairwoman Colette Avital of the Center of Organizations of Holocaust Survivors in Israel, thank you very much for being our guest this afternoon.
Thank you.
Well, violent anti-Semitic acts in Europe are skyrocketing. That's the finding of a study released on the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day by the Cantor Center for Contemporary European Jewry. The report was prepared with the European Jewish Congress and documents 766 violent anti-Semitic acts last year alone, including murder, arson, vandalism, and direct threats against Jewish institutions. These latest numbers constitute a 38% increase compared with 2013.
Well, we're talking about an increase, overall increase in violent attacks against Jews in Europe of more than a third, more than 33%. But the outcome is much more than the cold numbers. We're speaking about a change in environment in Europe. The European Jewry went through 3 terror attacks that took 8 lives of Jews in 3 major communities in Western Europe, and brought to a situation where Jewish life in Europe is at risk. Jews think twice before they go to Jewish institutions such as synagogues, schools, kosher restaurants. Jews think twice before wearing any Jewish symbol as a kippah or a Star of David. And Jews are starting to think if they could continue their life as Jews in Europe.
So what could be done?
Well, the European Jewish Congress came with very specific demands to the European Union leadership. We met with Foreign Minister Mogherini, with Vice President Timmermans of the European Union. We demand action, not only defensive action, more defense, more walls, thick walls, guards. We demand a creation of a united European body that will fight this, will fight it in an offensive manner, not a defensive manner, would combine all intelligence and start to hunt down these terror nests before they make the attack and not after.
The Anne Frank Trust has launched a new social media campaign encouraging people to post videos of themselves reading brief excerpts from the diary of the young Holocaust victim. IBA reporter Alexander Jen has the details.
It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals.
They seem so absurd and impractical. Yet I cling to them because I still believe
that people are truly good at heart.
In a unique approach to Holocaust remembrance, the Anne Frank Trust is using the transcendental words of the young writer in her memory. The teenage girl who perished in a concentration camp wrote these words from a secret apartment annex tucked behind a shield of bookcases during the German occupation of Amsterdam. Following the publication of her diary entries, she became the symbol of young Holocaust victims. The organization calls upon celebrities and the general public alike to read Frank's diary entries and post them to social media with the hashtag #NotSilent.
Anne Frank could not be silenced. Her voice has resonated across the generations in the 70 years since she died, and she's inspired people throughout those generations to actually speak out in her memory.
At a ceremony held in the London British Library, children read extracts from the diary, while others flipped through the Anne Frank memorabilia. Frida Weidman also attended. She was at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp at the same time as Frank. The survivor shared her powerful experience and praised Frank's insightful writing.
You know, when people were busy with making their own lives after the war, after the bombardment, after the occupation, about this, it took a while for people to want to listen, and to listen to stories of survival and the camps and all that.
It is assumed that Frank died of typhus at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, but there is no official record of how or when she passed. Organizers of the event celebrate her life today because it's the anniversary of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. The young, cheerful Jewess proved to be ahead of her time in her diary entries. She spoke of religion, women's rights, ideals, and many generations later, her words still resonate with modern society. Her profound text remains some of the most authentic documentation of the Holocaust to date. Her final diary entry was written August 1st, 1944. She was only 15 years old. These are the last words she wrote.
I keep trying to find a way to become what I'd like to be and what I could be if only there were no other people in the world. Yours, Anne M. Frank.
A new exhibit at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial shows how children used toys and games to help them survive. IBA's Ari O'Sullivan visited the display and filed this report.
Relatively few children survived the Holocaust. Most who were sent to the concentration camps were immediately dispatched to the gas chambers, and those who survived usually did so by hiding or assuming new identities. Over 1.5 million Jewish children were killed in the Holocaust, roughly the same number of children in Israel today. This exhibit, entitled Stars Without a Heaven, has collected games, toys, and dolls to help tell the story of those who lived. Curator Yehudit Inbar said it was a challenge to illustrate the narrative of survival because so few items survived the Holocaust.
If you take subjects like, game and play and creativity, usually when you think about it, you think, this is the good time of the children, But when you see the children in the Holocaust and you try to understand their behavior, you see that they develop games and creativity and play as tools of survival.
Claudine Schwartz-Rudel was only 4 years old when the Nazis invaded her native Paris. Her father hid the family jewels in her doll to help them bribe their way to safety.
My dad left Paris first to the south of France, which was under Vichy, and Jews are always optimistic. They thought that it will be less dangerous. And it was obvious for me that my doll I would take.
For her, the doll literally saved her life. Not something easy for her to give up to the exhibit.
It was hard. And you know what? All the years since then, when I worked at Yad Vashem, it happened to me that I went to look at the doll in.
Inbar said the exhibit showed the resilience of children's ability to cope with horrors and questioned perhaps modern society pampers children too much.
We remember those children and we respect them, but I think that we can learn, first of all, the children have amazing abilities, and we should ask today in the Western civilization, especially if we don't protect children too much, if we don't take something from them, because you can see what they did here with imagination, how imagination became the world where they could, have their laws, etc.
The exhibit is expected to remain open for a year. Ari O'Sullivan for IBA News.
In local finance, the shekel today put in a mixed performance in foreign currency trading, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up across the board. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team tells us to expect another drop in temperatures tomorrow, accompanied by isolated rain showers and thunderstorms that should subside by nightfall. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Laura Cornfield will be at this desk tomorrow to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.